This is episode 32 with Paul Angone.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 32 today, and I'm really excited to be speaking to today's guest. It's none other than Paul Angone, and in case you haven't heard of Paul, he's an author, speaker, and expert on the quarter life crisis and the unique challenges of life in your 20s. Now, Paul's passion for this work came about from his own struggles in life, trying to figure out his 20s, and the fact that nothing seemed to make sense. He's since spent the last 10 plus years researching this important decade and now shares what he's learned with others to help them navigate their 20s and avoid some of the headaches that he experienced. This interview is possibly the most impactful one I've done, and Paul shares some major wisdom which you're going to hear, both from his own books and elsewhere. This episode is full of amazing resources for quarter lifers, which I'll get to in just a second. But in this episode, you're going to learn: is the quarter life crisis a real thing? Why your 20s differ from other life transitions? How to know if you're experiencing a quarter life crisis? Why the most dangerous job you can have is a comfortable one? How social media and FOMO is plaguing our generation? The unusual place to find your purpose, and the biggest lie 20-somethings are believing. Now, as I mentioned, we mention a ton of resources in this interview, and you can pick those up at briantier.com/032. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's go hang out with Paul. Welcome back, everyone, and a huge welcome to this week's guest. I'm speaking to none other than Paul Angone. Paul, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
Hey, thanks, Brian. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, no, I reached out to you because obviously you're a big voice in the sort of quarter lifer 20-something millennial space, and I came across you on Twitter and we've interacted there a bit, but I thought, given the title of your books, who better to speak to about this topic of the quarter life crisis and just sort of living better in our 20s. So I'm really excited to get you on and to share your story and your wisdom with my audience. But before we get into that, I wonder if you could just tell the people listening a bit about Paul Angone and your sort of quarter life story.
Yeah. No, it's this has been my life for the last 10 years. It really is my passion. And mainly this period of time, this quarter life crisis and the quarter life comeback and all these things, it's my passion because I felt like I was failing so miserably in my 20s. I mean, I just felt I couldn't figure out anything. The only thing it felt normal was that how abnormal everything felt. It just nothing made sense. So that's when I started writing about this topic and researching and talking to other people about it. And I'm very blessed to have now 2 books out on the topic. Like you mentioned, 101 Secrets to Your 20s and All Grown Up, and groan as if you're groaning in pain, GROAN, because that's how it felt like to me. And then that's my website as well. So, man, I've been at this for over a decade now. It's really hard to believe. And many of those years were ripe with a bunch of failure. And that's really how this was birthed. And that's where that passion was birthed, it was so real to me. And I knew how difficult it was for me. So I knew if it was that hard for me, I knew that other people were going through it as well. And so I just wanted to lend my hand and help as many people as I could.
Yeah, and I can relate so strongly to that. I mean, especially putting a podcast together, I thought, how can I best serve the people that I feel like I want to speak to? And that was 20-somethings and quarter lifers. And I've told a few people, like 3 of the core reasons that I started a podcast was to grow my network and to meet people in the space. The second was because I'm not an expert and I can get people on who know more about this stuff than I do. And the third was, like you just said now, like I wanted to answer these questions that I'm asking. Like I wanted to learn this stuff at the same time as helping other people learn it as well. So yeah, I really resonate with that. And when you say you were kind of screwing up, what sort of challenges did you face in your 20s?
Yeah, I talk about it pretty openly in my second book, which is All Grown Up, Searching for Self-Faith and a Freaking Job. And that subtitle kind of encapsulates my 20s, is I felt like I was on this giant search, and I just pretty much felt lost. I didn't even have a clue on what next step to take or how do you figure these things out. And I just felt completely, just clueless about the whole process. And so it just pretty much felt like my whole life was drenched in failure and ambiguity and confusion and big questions. And I just didn't even know, how do you tackle these things, and what do you do with your life? And I wanted my life to mean something. I didn't want to just go through the motions or feel like I was a cog with a tie on, sitting in a cubicle, just going to work and hating it and wishing that my day would end. I wanted my life to really mean something, but I didn't know how to figure that out or what next steps to take. And so that's when I started really writing about that, because like you said, I was trying to answer some big questions in my own life. And that's where that passion was birthed, to really get down to the root of, okay, what do we do with the rest of our lives and how do we figure this out?
Yeah, and I love it. And I'm sure everyone listening will agree. Like, you can just hear the passion coming from your voice when you speak about this stuff. So I want to put a nail in this coffin, right? There's a lot of debate online about, is the quarter life crisis a real thing? Or is it just entitled millennials complaining that life is hard? Where do you stand on this debate?
Well, you could probably know my bias pretty quickly, because I'm definitely on the side of, to start, I was more on the side before of, quarter life crisis. That feels like it's such a dramatic term. Oh, it feels like this is a joke. This is just a pop culture term. This is really not that serious. That's probably where I started as a cocky college student who thought he was going to go change the world and make $1 million, by 26 years old. I mean, that's kind of the way I thought. But then right when you hit a quarter life crisis head on, and it's like your whole world just collapses and everything you were sure of, now you're completely unsure of everything you were sure of. Mm-hmm. That's when you start realizing, wow, this thing is real. This thing is intense, and it is very confusing, and it can feel it can make you feel crazy, because I think for many of us on the outside, sure, our life doesn't look very bad. And it's like, well, what can I complain about? Maybe I have a job. I have enough money to make rent. I'm paying back my student loans. I'm making it work. But yeah, nothing's too bad. I'm not living in a third world country. I'm not starving. I'm not living in poverty, for some of us. So it can feel like, well, what do I have to complain about? And I totally get that feeling. And that feeling is what made me feel even more crazy, because I'm like, man, I don't have anything really visible to be complaining about. And yet I feel like my life is lacking so much. And I feel like there's this huge void and I don't know how to get out of it. And so I remember that feeling, that pull, and that made me feel crazier than anything. And I get tons of emails like that now of people saying, you know what, on paper, everything looks good, but yet I feel like I want to light that paper on fire because none of it really means anything to me. And I don't know how to get out of that. So yeah, I think the quarter life crisis is a real thing. And man, I have hundreds of people that find me every day, find me at allgrownup.com just because they've Googled quarter life crisis or how do I make it through my quarter life crisis. So it's definitely a real thing. And a lot of people are going through it.
Yeah, I spoke to Jenny Blake about this, and I know you know her very well too. And I said to her, I said to her, is the quarter life crisis real? And she said no, which kind of surprised me. But the reason she said no is because it's not just going to be at this time of your life. We're constantly going to have to come to a crossroads where we have to make some tough decisions and figure things out and pivot.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I totally get what Jenny's saying, and she's right that this is really what we're describing is a major transition season of our lives. But I do think it works to label this as a quarter life crisis because I think the mid-20s transition period is a slightly unique one, and you are making all of your major life decisions in this decade, right? And that's why books like the Defining Decade by Meg J became so popular, because she really quantified that this, you're making your major life decisions right in this decade. So I do think it puts that extra weight. Now we will have to circle back and re-answer a lot of these questions later in life, this kind of cycles and seasons of life. So I get what Jenny is saying, but I do think it's apt to describe this as a unique period, because there are some unique things taking place in your 20s that's going to be different than in later decades.
Yeah, I totally agree. So Paul, how then do we know if we're actually going through a quarter life crisis?
I think to some extent, many of us are. And I think really where we find ourselves when we're going through a quarter life crisis, and maybe you don't even want to describe as what you're going through as a quarter life crisis because it doesn't feel that extreme to you. But I think anytime that you're asking yourself some bigger questions about the direction of your life, where you're headed, the decisions you're making, I think it can start to feel like, man, I'm kind of going through a quarter life crisis because I'm at this crossroads, so to speak, and I don't know exactly what path to take. And I feel some of that fear and anxiety and maybe some loneliness and isolation coming about because I don't know where my next step should go. And so really, I think in a sense, it's almost a positive thing. And I've written articles, why your quarter life crisis is the best thing to ever happen to you.
Yeah, I love
because
that.
When I see people going through that, I really think they're just being really intentional about their lives. And I think they're starting to ask themselves some really hard questions about what do I really want with my life? And yeah, I think we should be asking those questions now. And I'd much rather have a 23, 25, 27-year-old asking themselves those hard questions instead of when we're 45 or 50 or 55 years old and we never were brave enough to ask ourselves the hard questions and to make some big changes. We just kept going with the flow, getting promoted at a job we never wanted to be at because that's what we were supposed to do, supposed to being in quotes. And then we look at our life at 55 and think, man, this was all just crap. Nothing of this means anything. And then we freak out. And that's where the quarter life crisis comes from. It's a spin off the midlife crisis, right? That was the first phrase. And so I'd much rather have us experiencing that angst now because we're asking ourselves those hard questions now than when we're 55 and we have a lot more on the line. We have kids and a marriage and a house and a mortgage. Right now we have a little bit more freedom to get lost on purpose with purpose. And that's kind of what I described that quarter life crisis period, getting lost on purpose, but with purpose. It's kind of intentional lostness.
Yeah, I think Meg J crushed it with the name, The Defining Decade. So Paul, you mentioned jobs and careers and that sort of thing. I think I read before that you said you did like just about every job you can think of.
Yes.
Could you share what some of those were and then some of the lessons you learned from having so many different jobs?
Oh man, yeah. And I think that's the reality of a lot of 20-somethings nowadays. It's I describe it as we're not climbing the corporate ladder as much nowadays. Instead, it feels like we're doing more island hopping as a career search. You're going from island to island and picking up different skills and different experiences as you keep traveling, and you're hoping to get to that kind of career promised land. But it's this collection of things that you've picked up along the journey instead of just climbing this one ladder. And so for me, man, I've worked some crazy jobs in my 20s. I was recently just writing on my blog and telling the stories about when I would go to inner city LA and do presentations to middle schools and high schools about college. And so I'd go to these assemblies filled with 500 middle school kids, and it was just wild. I mean, it was just a crazy assembly, and I'm up here giving a presentation about college, and they could have cared less about listening to me or listening to me talk about college. And so it was a crazy room to try to keep control of. And so that was one experience, but it was really a lot of value to me when I look back, and I look back at all these jobs that felt random at the time, but really I was getting some very hands-on public speaking experience where I was having to try to win over a crowd of middle school inner city kids that was not an easy crowd to win over. And so now when I go speak to a corporation or a conference, I don't feel as nervous because I'm like, man, if I could hold the attention of a bunch of 11-year-olds, I can keep the attention of some 50-somethings, with suits on. So yeah, there's a range of experiences that I have that felt meaningless to me at the time, or felt like, man, this is just another crappy job. And I write about that in my first book, 101 Secrets for Your 20s. That really, it seems like crappy jobs are a 20-something rite of passage, and many of us will have those. But if we're intentional in those times, and if we learn and try to get as much out of each job as we can, and we see it as this building block to something bigger, well, then we bring more meaning into jobs that feel meaningless. And I had to learn that the hard way. I did not do that well for many years in my 20s. And as I looked back, that was something I could have done much better. So I wouldn't have had to keep repeating those crappy jobs. I could have moved forward a lot faster.
Yeah, it echoes something that a mentor of mine, I actually interviewed him in episode 5. His name's Simon Hurry. And I met up with him for lunch the one day, and he said, like, a job doesn't have to be, you don't need to do like that thing that you dream of doing one day right now.
Yeah.
But a job right now could be, you could be building up a skill set, or building up a network of people that slowly get to you. It's kind of like Smiley Pozwalski talks about lily pads in his The Quarter Life Breakthrough book. So yeah, I really love that. And you mentioned as well, like, the most dangerous job you can have is a comfortable one. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us are secretly, trying to get to that place in life where it feels comfortable again, where it feels normal, where it feels like you're not asking yourself these hard questions, or it doesn't feel like this frustration of having to work through a job that maybe is difficult, or there's a lot of things that you don't necessarily love about your job. But yeah, I wrote that the most dangerous job you can have is a comfortable one, because I think that's really where you start putting your life back into cruise control, and maybe you start putting aside all those major questions, or all those dreams or hopes, or things that you knew you wanted to do, or that you knew, man, if I don't try this, I'm going to die inside. But then sometimes I think we start sacrificing, and we start really settling into a job that we know is not a good fit for us, but the benefits start calling the shots, or the pay raise, or the promotion, or just this fear of change, of, man, I don't want to go through that season again of intensity. So even though I kind of hate my job, man, well, I'm just going to go back and put on Netflix and just hang out and drink and do whatever. I'll start medicating myself. And man, it's not the life I envisioned, but what do I do? I think that is a scary place when everything starts to feel so comfortable, and you know that this is not where you want to be, but yet the fear of change is scaring you. And I love this quote from a professor, Robert Quinn, in his book Deep Change, and I say this a lot, but he has this great quote that to change is hell, but to not change and to stay on the path of slow death is also hell. But the change, the hell of change, is the hero's journey. And so even though that change is hell, but staying on the path of slow death is also hell. So you might as well pick the hero's journey, where you're making transformational change, rather than slow death. And when I read that, man, that hit home, because I'm like, slow death, that does not sound very appealing. And that felt like what I was living in at different points in my 20s. I was just living this slow death, and I didn't want to do that anymore.
Yeah, two of my favorite quotes that came up for me now, I think they might have both been, well, at least the one from Jim Carrey. The one is, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And the other one was, you can fail doing something you don't like, so why not take a chance doing something you do like? Those both.
Yeah, that's great.
There. So Paul, two of the most common struggles for people in their 20s, which I want to ask you about. The first one is, how do we deal with, in the time of sort of the Instagram age, how do we deal with FOMO and social comparison?
Yeah, this is a huge one. Yeah, and if anybody's read any of my work, you know that I'm pretty big on what I call the new OCD. And this is not OCD as we think about right now, but I call it obsessive comparison disorder. And I think this is plaguing our generation, especially, with social media, making it so easy to instantly compare ourselves with everybody and this kind of heightened PR spin version of our lives that we're putting online. That we're not putting our real lives online, obviously. We're putting these little glimpses and these snapshots. When I'm having a fight with my wife and we're yelling at each other, going at it, it's not like we stop and I say, hey, hold on, babe, I want to take a picture of this. I want to take a video of us yelling at each other. I want to post this on Facebook. No, we take the picture of the beach shot, or the nice restaurant shot, or, I love you. It's our 10th anniversary. We've never fought in our lives. It's this weird little version that we create. And so I'm really big on people being aware of obsessive comparison disorder and really trying to cut it out. If you feel yourself going to Facebook or going to Instagram, or Pinterest or wherever, and you start feeling that anxiety of what am I doing with my life? And look at my friends, look at all the stuff they have, look at the titles and the marriages and whatever it might be, to just stop it. And maybe that means getting off of social media for a while and going on a social media fast or whatever you need to do. But that really will kill all our creativity and all our forward movement. It's like drowning, trying to swim to everybody else's ship instead of just sailing your own ship. And really that's what we have to do, because you only have your story to live. And there'll always be other things that people are doing that look amazing, but you got to live the best story that you can out of what you have. And I know I say that from my own experience because it's really killed me too. I'll look at other authors even that have books out and be like, oh man, their book is way more successful than mine. Why can't I be more like them? I need to write more like them. And so it never stops. But obsessive comparison disorder, I think, is a huge one that is creating so much anxiety and also isolation with our generation, where we're not really having real conversations with each other because we don't really want to be honest about what we're struggling with, because it looks like no one's struggling, so we don't want to talk about it. So it's a huge one, because everybody is struggling, but we're all struggling to make it appear like we're not struggling. And that's a big problem in our day and age.
Yeah, it's funny because now that I think about it while you were chatting, like we've always collected photographs of happy memories. Like our parents have the family photo albums, which we hate when they pull out when we've got a new girlfriend or something like that. But it seems like in the modern day, it's almost like we see it as competition and like we have to be better than our friends' pictures. So I agree with you.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Brian. And I think you made a great point, because I think when we used to print out pictures and have photo albums, they were for us. They were for us to remember those good times or to have that memory, that snapshot. But now I think all our pictures, everything we're doing is for them. It's not even for us. It's not even for our memories. It's just, how can I make this look amazing? And I need to share this with my friends to get a certain amount of likes. And I call it death by affirmation. And I think that's a problem right now that we're living in. We're always trying to get affirmed. And I think it's coming from that angst and anxiety and fear and depression of where my life is going. So we post these pictures because we want to get that thumbs up. And it's basically that digital way of saying, you're on the right path. Keep going because you got 100 likes. When that might not be the case at all.
Yeah. No, we could probably do a whole interview just on this topic, but I want to go to the second big struggle that people in this generation face. And I want to hear your take on, how some of your tips on how do we find our purpose?
Oh man, and it's a huge one, right? And that's what people have been asking, since they could ask questions. And really I see everybody around the world asking this question. I get emails from so many different countries, so many different places. And if it boils down to it, I think at the heart, that is the question that people are asking is, where do I find my purpose? How do I figure this out? And man, it's not an easy one. This is not an easy one to unpack, but there's a couple ways that I look at it, and that I, after all my research and writing, that I feel like is the most profound ways for me to look at this is, one, I think a lot of the time our purpose is birthed out of some of our biggest problems, some of our biggest challenges, some of the stuff that we've had to go through where we've been like, man, why God am I going through this? This is not fair. Why did this happen to me? I think a lot of the times our passion and our purpose is birthed out of some of our biggest problems. And you see this, played out. That's basically what any entrepreneur is doing, right? They're solving a problem. They're filling a need, some problem that they have seen, that they have experienced, and they want to do something about. Well, I think that's really true in our lives too. And I don't think we think of it that way. I know I didn't. One of my biggest problems was I didn't have a clue what to do with my life. So I started writing about it, and it started becoming my passion because I knew how personally painful it was to me. So I wanted to help other people through it. And so I think for any of us, sometimes we need to look at some of those problems, some of those failures, some of those challenges that we've had to go through that we might want to help others go through now, or we might want to create something that alleviates that problem. That's why you have this podcast, Brian, the Core Life Comeback, was birthed out of that issue for you. And then same with me with my resources, but it's also same for the inventor that invents a product to alleviate a problem. So I think that's a big one, and almost a freeing way to look at it, because it's not just, what excites you the most all the time. It's, what do you feel so deeply about because you've experienced that pain, and now how can you alleviate that in others?
I love that. It's kind of like the common example of like people losing a lot of weight and then becoming a trainer or a
exactly. Coach. Yeah, if you look at, marriage and family therapists, they probably had their parents' marriage dissolve, or maybe they had a divorce and then they became a counselor. Every youth pastor I've known that's like worked at a church, they were typically like the most jacked up kids of all time, doing the most drugs. And then their life got changed, and then they started working in a church to help others going through those same kind of issues. Really see that. And those are the people that do the most powerful work, because they have an empathy and they have a passion and they have an understanding, because they know, they're like, I have been there and I want to help others get out of this. And that is a powerful place to operate from. And I think that's where the change agents, those difference makers, they're doing it out of that pain that's then being redeemed and transformed in other people's lives.
I love that. Paul, you wrote obviously 101 Secrets for Your 20s, and I'm going to link that in the show notes for sure and recommend everyone go out and read it. But I wonder if you could share some of the sort of some of your favorite secrets or tips in the book.
Yeah, there's it was a fun book to write, and it was really birthed out of a blog article that went viral and kind of changed my life. I wrote 21 Secrets to Your 20s, and it started sharing like crazy, and then it ended up being my first book. We've talked about a few of them, already, but some of my favorites is going back to a topic that we were talking about a little bit before with working those crappy jobs. Is I tell a story about a guy I call the mayor of Starbucks. And I won't tell this whole story right now, but basically I run into this guy at Starbucks who's a barista at Starbucks, working at a coffee shop. And he's basically the most popular barista I've ever seen in my life. And I tell this story because it taught me a valuable lesson, and I won't tell the whole ins and outs of the story to ruin it for people. But basically looking at him do such a great job at a job that wasn't so great, it really taught me that lesson of, Paul, stop searching for the right job and start worrying and focusing about your job getting the right you. Kind of going back to what we were talking about, how you are not giving your jobs the best you. So who are you to complain about, the fact that your job isn't the best? That's pretty hypocritical of you. So that was a really impactful one for me, and a meaningful one for me. Another secret that was a big one for me was just this realization that life will never feel like it's supposed to. And again, I mentioned that before, this quotes around supposed to, and it just hit me one day because I kept thinking to myself, when am I going to experience success like I was supposed to? Or when am I going to get married like I was supposed to? Or when am I going to have a career like I was supposed to? And then it just hit me that the life will never feel like it's supposed to, because I've created some crazy expectation in my head that isn't reality, and it's filling me with so much angst. Because I'm always waiting for supposed to happen instead of just living in the moment, living right now and trying to get the most out of what I'm doing right now, instead of waiting for this elusive moment when I can start really living and pursuing my dream. that's never going to happen when I could just start doing it right now, So it's that idea of dreaming big, but being faithful in the small.
Man, that is huge. That I got this kind of like almost like goosebumps when you said that. And it reminds me of, part of my quarter life crisis. I was trying to figure out how to pay the bills and all that good stuff. And I basically started selling all my stuff, and I was going to go teach English in South Korea. And I jotted down because I ended up getting offered a job in the city that I was thinking of going, and suddenly it became very real. And I jotted down pros and cons of going and why I wanted to go. And I realized that a lot of the stuff that I wanted to achieve from traveling and doing that sort of thing, I could already do right now.
Yeah.
And that it just reminded me of what you said, life is not going to be what you think it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So that was cool. I'm always a little cautious of prescribing more and more information rather than people actually go and do the hard work and ask and answer those difficult questions. But if you had to suggest, maybe let's keep it to your top 3 recommended books for 20 somethings, other than obviously All Grown Up and 101 Secrets.
Yeah, obviously other than mine. Yeah.
I mean, that would be number 1 and 2, but let's say your three recommendations.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have, there's lots of posts like this, but I have one, the 27 books for 20 somethings. It's on All Grown Up. And so that's a good one to check out. And it's all nonfiction books that I listed out. And so if somebody wants to see the 27 books that really impacted me in my journey, that'd be a good place to start. Cool. But some of the ones that really stick out for me is a short one called Let Your Life Speak. And it's by a professor named Parker Palmer. And I love that one. And I don't think many in our generation are reading Parker Palmer. He's older. It's like reading a book from your wise grandpa that's seen a lot of life and is really being vulnerable and honest about some of the hard questions he's had to go through. And so it's really that question of calling and him going through those different seasons of his life. And he shares this story, and it's so beautiful. And he's got so much profound quotes and insights in that book. So Let Your Life Speak is a big one that I think anybody should read. Another one that I loved was Man's Search for Meaning, which many people have read. That's a very popular book by Viktor Frankl, and it's about his time being in a concentration camp, and what he found saved people's lives in the concentration camp, what gave them hope, and it's a very profound book. So anybody that's struggling with those questions, I think that's a great one to check out. Is Man's Search for Meaning. Another one that I think was big for me, and actually was the movie more than the book, which that's usually not the case, but in this one it was Into the Wild.
Yeah, man.
Which was, the true story. That movie was really profound for me. The book was good, but the movie was profound because it was really kind of a warning for me. And I think it's a tough one to watch. It's not an easy movie to watch. If you haven't watched it, I won't give away the end, but it's not easy. But it was a good warning for me about the problem with getting too isolated. With tucking yourself away and trying to handle all these questions out on your own. And so it was a wake-up call for me that you need other people in your life. And you can't go on to this great Alaskan adventure by yourself. You need somebody to go with you on that journey.
Man, that is one of my favorite movies. I probably watch it every quarter. And I completely agree with what you said. That was another thing when I was doing this sort of brainstorming around going to South Korea, is I kind of realized I would have been isolating myself and cutting off the relationships that are actually going to help me to get to that place that I want to get to. There's an amazing quote about this, and it really slips my mind, but it speaks of that same sort of message. Paul, I want to be mindful of the time, but I just want to go through some sort of quickfire questions at the end here.
Sure.
The first one is, what do you wish you'd been told in your 20s?
Man, relax. And that this is more, your 20s is more about, success in your 20s is more about setting the table than enjoying the feast. So just relax. You're setting the table. You're trying to get all of it laid out. You're trying to prepare, and that you feel like you're failing a lot. But just remember that failing doesn't ruin your story. Failure really helps you write your story. And so just relax. Be purposeful in the process. And if you feel like you're lost, that's great, because all explorers have to get lost to some extent. But be intentional in your lostness and bring people along with you, guides and mentors and friends along the way.
I love that. What is the greatest opportunity for quarter lifers today?
Man, I think it's to marinate in these questions, not to just fly through this process. Because I think for many of us, a transition feels like, oh, this stage where I'm going through one important part of my life to another important part of my life. But I think these transition periods in our life really are the most important seasons of our life, because that's really where you're setting that trajectory of your next steps. So be very intentional in this time, marinate in it. Don't just try to get through it as fast as you can. Try to ask those hard questions as much as you can and really think through those answers.
And embrace it, right? Like you said, a sort of unusual way of finding your purpose is focusing on the things you're struggling with and working through those.
Yeah. Ask yourself those hard questions.
This next question, there's two more. The next one's a little bit of a meta question.
Sure.
And I love hearing people's reaction to it. So just listen close. If this had to become the most important podcast or piece of content for 20-somethings to hear, what would I need to ask you, and how would you answer that?
Oh man, what would you need to ask me, and how? Man, I don't know. You've asked a lot of really good questions already. So I feel like we've touched on this a lot. Maybe what's one of the biggest lies? What's one of the biggest lies that you think 20-somethings are believing? Because I think that can become a really it can become a dangerous one. And and this is what I talk. We've touched on this a little bit. We just touched on this with Into the Wild. But if you ask me, what's a big lie that you think 20-somethings are believing right now? I would say it's that you are alone in this. And I have so many emails that I've gotten over the last 10 years where it's somebody saying, I felt so alone in this. I felt like I was the only one going through this. I'm the only one struggling. And so that would be the lie to blow up. Obviously, we're here because you're not alone in this. And there's a lot of other people going through it. So have some peace in that this is normal. This is a normal season of life, even though it feels so intense. So you're not alone. So don't isolate yourself even more, feeling like you're the only one going through it, because you're not. Be courageous enough to be vulnerable with other people and have authentic conversations with others. And you'll realize that they're going through a lot of the same questions as well, even if we're not posting about it on Facebook. Yeah,
I was going to say it ties back into only showing the sunshine and roses on social media.
Yeah.
Paul, I've got one more question. But before we get into that, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and find out more about All Grown Up and anything else you're currently working on?
Yeah. All Grown Up is my home base, allgrownup.com. And again, that's groan as if you're groaning in pain, GROAN. And then also signaturesauce.com is another one of my big projects. And that's an online course that I run, where I break down kind of finding your purpose, finding where your passion, purpose, and career collide. And I call it finding your signature sauce, because it's like that master chef in the kitchen putting together different ingredients to find that flavor that's unique to them. I think that's really true for us as well. And I love calling it finding your signature sauce and figuring out how do we bring those ingredients to the surface so you can start moving forward in your purpose. So I have a free 3-part course at signaturesauce.com about how to get unstuck. So anybody that's feeling stuck and you need some encouragement or inspiration, you can check out that free course at signaturesauce.com.
Cool. And I'll make sure to link that up in the show notes, which will be at briantier.com/032 and possibly 033 if this is a split episode. But Paul, before I get on to the final question, I just want to acknowledge you for coming on today and for kind of leaning into those difficult questions in your 20s and using that to kind of leverage your work going forward and for helping other people go through this stage of their life too. I think it's really awesome, and I love the work that you're doing, and I'm sure we'll be in touch a lot more going forward. The final question that I have
Definitely.
is, what one thing can listeners do this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback?
Oh man, I would say it's starting to answer some of these hard questions. And what are the hard questions? Well, that's a good question. I have an article at All Grown Up called 11 questions every 20 something needs to ask. 11 questions every 20 something needs to ask. So if you Google that, you go to All Grown Up, start answering those questions. Go through those. It's been a popular post that's helped a lot of people. So start doing that and then take it from there.
Yeah, I've checked out that article and I can't recommend it highly enough. So we'll definitely link that up. Paul Angone, thank you so much for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Honor being on, and thanks for what you're doing to help 20-something and encouraging and inspiring others. I really appreciate your work.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up this week's episode of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast, episode 32. And a big thanks to Paul Angone once again for coming on and sharing some time with us this week. Really great guy and super knowledgeable on this topic. So I recommend you go check out his work too. If you like this episode, share it around with your friends on social media and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier to let me know some of your biggest takeaways. For me, it's definitely what Paul said about life doesn't look how you think it's supposed to. So forget about what other people are doing on social media and start asking yourself those difficult questions. Now, as always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this show at briantier.com/032. And to get other episodes like this, make sure you sign up at quarterlifecomeback.com. Thanks again for spending time with me this week. And until next time, keep creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.